Awesome. Well, let's start off with a little joke, shall we? Where did the cyber criminal go after he committed his crime? Fuck, someone actually got it. He ran somewhere. But now that I've started with a joke that is as high quality as that, the talk can really only go up from here, and I can stand in front of everyone and deliver it, so I can sure as hell deliver the rest of the talk. All right, so social engineering. It is a seasoned and old discipline that really dates back to early parts of history. In fact, it goes back as far as the Bible. Jacob had an older brother, Esau, who, as the eldest and following cultural tradition, would receive all his father Isaac's blessings and inherit everything that he owned. Now, Jacob was a little bit feeling put off by this, and he knew his dad had poor eyesight and relied on a whole bunch of other senses to navigate different situations. So what Jacob did was he wore the skin of 2 goats. He covered himself with their hair so that when his father reached out and relied on his other senses to touch him, he mistook clean-shaven Jacob for his hirsute or hairy son Esau. And according to the book of Genesis, the rest was biblical history. Now, social engineering is not a politically correct field, and I'll show you just in a minute why. In fact, social engineering takes advantage of bias, age, and gender norms, amongst other things, in order to allow an engineer to have someone act without thinking. In fact, the objective and definition of social engineering is any act that influences a person to take an action that they may or may not be in their best interest. Now, what it is at its heart and at its core is ultimately it's a discipline that focuses on the manipulation and trust exploitation rather than technical exploitation. So I'll show you. For example, we've been tasked with getting entry into a particular building, and we decide that as a ruse, the best way to get in there might be to apply for some of the advertised jobs. Now, you've got a few different people in your little social engineering team. You've got a 40-year-old white blonde male. You have a 43-year-old Asian female. And you have a 27-year-old Latino male. Now, what I'll do is I'll give 2 pretexts, and for each one, I want someone to yell out, and someone beat me to my own punchline, so I know we're not afraid to yell out. For each one, I want someone to yell out who they think would be best. Now, our first pretext is that we'll be going into the company as a janitor. So who do we think would be best here? Yeah, so there's actually 2 options for this one. The first one is the 27-year-old Latino or the 40-year-old white blonde male. And that's because they play into cultural and age-based stereotypes that will aid the pretext's believability. All right, number 2. Our next pretext is that we're providing some catering and cooking for a function. Any ideas? Yep, I heard it back there. So yes, the Asian female, again, would be the best one here. And that, again, goes back to some cultural stereotypes. So the reason that all these choices in the last 2 examples would be more successful is because they align with the stereotypes of people in those professions. And that means that people in the environment surrounding them won't think twice about challenging their moves. Ultimately, thinking is the enemy of a social engineer. It's the exact opposite action we want to encourage. Now, social engineering remains one of the most prevalent attack vectors, consistently accounting for a significant number and percentage of data breaches. And at the lifeblood and cornerstone of all social engineers is OSINT, or what we call open source intelligence. Open source intelligence is the best place to start any social engineering engagement because it provides us with more insights and information than we could ever achieve from an interaction alone. OSINT has become the critical foundation of modern social engineering, transforming publicly available information into a powerful weapon for potential attackers. Now, at its core, OSINT involves collecting and analyzing data from accessible sources such as social media platforms, public records, professional networks, online databases, and your digital footprint and breadcrumbs. All of these seemingly innocuous pieces of information, which range from professional LinkedIn profiles and Facebook activity, all the way through to public government records and online forum interactions, actually provide a comprehensive mosaic of an individual's or organization's characteristics, their relationships, and from their potential vulnerabilities. For those who are skilled at social engineering, this information can be used to personalize narratives that attack and leverage seemingly disconnected data points into a compelling and credible storyline that bypasses typical human and technological defenses. These carefully crafted narratives exploit psychological triggers like trust, urgency, authority, and familiarity, transforming fragmented pieces of public information into a precise, targeted attack vector that can manipulate even well-trained individuals into revealing sensitive information or taking actions against their own best interest. Now, I've researched what the contemporary stereotype of a hacker is. And as you can see, what we think of hacking, we think of a dark, alluring image and a masked baddie in a dimly lit room, typing away at what is often a colorfully lit keyboard. But that's not the case. This form of human hacking breaks the mold and requires someone personable. It's more than just hacking a server, like a lot of people in the next room over are doing. It relies on non-technical, conversational, and social skills, as well as the exploitation of human and non-human domains. Now, social engineering relies on a wide range of skills. It's not just one or the ability to pen test a network. These include techniques that I'll touch on in brief, but are certainly not limited to the ability to create convincing pretexts, to phish our targets with OSINT-derived information, to bait and hook others, enticing them in, and then without being exhaustive, but still to name one more key skill, tailgating. These are just some of the constructs and skills that we need to be able to apply a deft touch to in order to be successful in an engagement. The reason that OSINT is the lifeblood of a social engineer is because of the way it provides real and visible depth into a target's life, their preferences, skills, and even their social circle. That visibility then allows us to develop curated and clean avenues of entry into a range of different environments, particularly ones that we, as a social engineer, might otherwise not have fitted into quite so well. Now, to give context, before we can begin with other key social engineering skills like pretexting and phishing, we need the information that will make these more believable and more focused. And that information is derived from OSINT gathering. A skilled social engineer might spend weeks, even months, developing a backstory, collecting minute details from OSINT sources to create a persona so convincing that it can withstand the most rigorous scrutiny. To give some perspective, there are over 50 billion web pages indexed by Google, and some sources have said that Google indexes less than 5% of the entire internet. Now, what that means is that of the 50 billion websites that are out there, only 5% could be trawled to learn more about you. But that means that there's 50 billion sources of information that we can look through and scrape to get information about a target. But that's a lot of pages, so we need to know how to search through this information with skill and precision. And this is where Google dorking comes in. Google dorking is the first key tool we'll talk about today for a social engineer. Now, I've always loved dorks. I mean, you should have seen my first boyfriend. But also, if you put me in front of a TV with Married at First Sight playing, I will dork all night long. But in the context of cybersecurity, and probably back to the more relevant matter at hand, Google dorking is one of the finest tools in our toolbox. And it's a technique that really helps you understand and uncover some details we might not otherwise have seen. To briefly summarize what Google dorking is, no, it's not these guys here, but it's the art of creating search queries that narrow down results on Google. Think of Google as an entire database that indexes websites. When you're searching using that little search bar, you're actually searching the back end. And what will happen is that all the results you're returned are from that database. By using search queries, or what we call Google Dorks, we can actually manipulate what is returned to be more refined, more relevant, and more matching the niche that we need. One key discovery that I've actually made with Google Dorking is the discovery of internal documents that have been improperly handled. For example, in one search, I used the in-text parameter and slipped the word confidential in. I coupled that with the site parameter, which was my target's domain. I then layered another dork on top, which restricted the type of information to be displayed by Google to only a PDF. By narrowing down our search with those parameters, Google then went back through its entire database and provided me only PDFs with the word confidential in them. And these were the ones that had been targeted, that had been posted and authored by my target and put on their website. What this did was it provided me with a number of key documents, mostly public, bar that one I mentioned before, which had slipped through the cracks. The one document that slipped through the cracks was an internal document marked strictly confidential. From a social engineer's perspective, this strictly confidential document was an insider's perspective that provided me several opportunities, which included opportunities to actually pivot off the information and use other tools to get even more data about the company. So just like with any internal document, you're able to learn a lot about the expectations for staff and the ways of working within the company. Since this was an internal document that covered human resources practices, it was pretty solid. What it did was it also provided me with a couple of links as well. And those links actually took me directly to the login page of their SharePoint, which is why it's so important to have strong security controls at all login points of your network. And what it also gave me was a list of internal contact numbers and names that I could touch to. Now, once I had this information, I thought, why stop there? I ran the document through an EXIF tool, and I managed to get a little bit more information. Running the document through the EXIF tool gave me the opportunity to find out the name of the author and some insight into the review cycle of the document, which was annual, and as well as the devices and the operating systems that were in use. Now, because I actually ran 4 documents through the EXIF tool, it gave me a more comprehensive picture, and I could see the little bits of data that matched each one. So for all 4, the operating system and devices that were used were Dell and Windows. Now, you might be wondering what's so good about understanding what OS they're using or why they're using Dell. Well, that goes back to the fact that despite their subtlety, the details provided enough insights to craft an approach and develop a pretext. And that pretext could take full advantage of the situation, which highlights the importance of safeguarding even the most small and minute details and digital breadcrumbs. Because I was able to use it in a campaign to, firstly, craft a spearfish and reach out to another employee that I'd found as on the list of being responsible for giving final approval on a number of the documents. I was able to attach a file that contained a payload. And I also put into it a little bit more of that developed and well-built pretext. So I provided a message along with my payload that said, "Hey Sam," for intents and purposes, the target is now called Sam. But I know I'm ahead of our annual review cycle and that it's not coming up for 2-3 more months, but I've gone ahead and beaten the buzzer. Would you please open this and cast your eye over it so we can get ahead of the game and you aren't bombarded all at once with policies to approve? Now, that starts to highlight the second weapon and technique of a social engineer, which is pretexting. Pretexting is perhaps the most intellectually sophisticated of social engineering techniques. It involves creating elaborately constructed personas and scenarios that appear entirely credible. A skilled social engineer might spend weeks or even months developing a backstory, collecting minute details from OSINT sources to create a persona so convincing that it can withstand rigorous scrutiny. Imagine an attacker posing as an IT support technician. They've done their OSINT, they've developed a pretext, and they've got some specific organizational knowledge, they know some technical jargon, and they've got contextual details that can make their narrative virtually indistinguishable from a legitimate person. Now, pretexting is particularly prevalent in 2024 and 25, with the Verizon data breach investigations report highlighting this as the leading cause of cybersecurity incidents. That's not to miss out another social engineering technique, phishing, and phishing and pretexting via email remains the leading cause of incidents. Now that very well brings us to another technique and tool in a social engineer's toolbox, which is ishings, all the different ishings, but particularly focusing in on phishing through email, smishing, which is SMS texts, and vishing, which was the word of the year in 2015. The last ishing as well that I do want to note, because it is prevalent, is QR code phishing. If you haven't heard of that one, it's also called quishing. Okay, I'm only 26, I'm still allowed to laugh at that. And quishing is the word of my year every year, because I just think it's fantastic. Now, I won't spend too long on phishing because it's so commonplace in terms of public discussion. But to touch briefly on it, phishing has become so important to social engineers because it's a direct way to harvest granular bits of information and intelligence. Phishing adds to the information collected through OSINT, and our OSINT can help us tailor a message so precise and authentic that it is able to bypass traditional security awareness training and seemingly appears to come from trusted sources. It's got that contextually relevant information, and that all tied together triggers our automatic trust response. When this is done effectively, it helps us achieve the very essence of social engineering, which is to have someone act without thinking. These days, QR codes are probably the most devilish of details. They allow us to easily make effective social engineering and attack vectors, particularly in a post-COVID world where I'm sure many of us have found that we can't even go out for a cup of coffee without having to scan a QR code. I would say this because I work at a cafe that scans QR codes as well, so I say this from experience. Now, following the pandemic, we've developed an inherent trust in QR codes, where they've been adopted almost into normal everyday interactions. This trust that we've built up, where people aren't questioning intent or origin, is an advantage to a social engineer. The fact that there's a lack of transparency about where a QR code may take you when you scan it is just an additional win. What you'll find is that social engineers capitalize on this by distributing malicious QR codes in ways that are both low effort and high impact. The effectiveness of QR code-based attacks is further enhanced by the psychological principles that they exploit. People are drawn to QR codes because of their convenience, and so they often scan them without hesitation in situations where speed and ease is prioritized. Curiosity also plays a role here, using bait in enticing messages like scan to learn more, or exclusive access here, or like this real-world one I've seen around my suburb. And yes, I have actually seen that. I haven't brought myself to scan it yet, but I am looking forward to the day I borrow someone else's phone to do that. Now, all of these can actually prompt even the most cautious of users to scan without thinking critically. That leads us nicely into baiting, which represents a more tactile approach to social engineering and exploits the fundamental human desire for gain and curiosity. Whether it's a seemingly innocent USB drive that's been left in the corporate kitchen parking lot, or an enticing online offer, baiting creates scenarios where the target's natural inclination towards opportunity overrides typical security skepticism. The most effective baiting strategies are those that appear both random but are also incredibly specific to the target's interests. Tailgating exploits the deeply ingrained social norms of politeness and helpfulness as well. An attacker might appear confident, carry some appropriate-looking equipment, or create a scenario that triggers an automatic helpful response from someone else, and that allows them to gain access to restricted areas. This technique relies on the human tendency to avoid things like social awkwardness and turns our most basic social instincts into a vulnerability. Kevin Mitnick, one of the world's most well-known social engineers, often used tailgating as part of his manipulation toolkit. In one particularly famous case, Mitnick used tailgating to gain unauthorized access to the physical offices of the major tech company RSA Security. While his goal was to obtain sensitive information about RSA's internal systems and their proprietary encryption algorithms, he took to social engineering to do it. To achieve this, he actually posed as an employee who had forgotten his badge, we've all done it, and simply followed a legitimate employee into the secured office space. Now, Mitnick's deep understanding of human psychology enabled him to exploit the natural tendency of others to be polite and helpful against them. As the legitimate employee held the door open for him, Mitnick smiled, thanked them, and then seamlessly entered the premises without raising suspicion. Now, tailgating as a young-ish female is a unique opportunity, one that takes advantage of biases and norms in society. A plan for me to carry out a tailgating intrusion would be relatively simple. I, for example, could walk up to the front door carrying a large box full of KFC, making it look like I'm really handling a heavy load. Those zingers these days is just getting a bit outrageous. Now, I walk up to the door carrying a large box full of KFC, and I'll make it look like I'm struggling a little bit as well, like I'm carrying a real heavy load. So as I approach the security door, I start to struggle with the bag, making it seem impossible to hold the door open and reach for my swipe pass at the same time. In these situations, people instinctively around me felt the need to come to my aid, especially because I was clearly in a situation where it looked like I was in genuine need. And this is totally hypothetical as well, absolutely hypothetical. Should have said that before. Now, as expected, someone approaches the door right behind me. I briefly look at them, smile, and without missing a beat, explain, I've got a shitload of KFC here for the team, but I'm just carrying it all and I can't reach my pass that's in my back pocket. This is simple enough to do the trick. It is simple enough to not only do the trick and beyond being let in the front door, but the staff member actually gets me the lift and swipes me up to any floor that I asked. The effectiveness of this tactic lies in the psychology behind it. People are naturally inclined to assist others, especially in situations that might seem pretty harmless. By exploiting this human instinct, along with appearing to be constrained by the large, bulky KFC boxes, I was able to bypass security without even a second glance and free to roam the building from there. Now, this talk is actually looking more at the physical and the human side of social engineering, so I won't go into the technical tools that people in this trade use, but it would be remiss of me to not mention a couple of the key ones. There are a range of tools that are effective for social engineers on the technical side, and these include things like ReconNG, which I probably butchered the saying, Weigel, which I definitely butchered the saying, Spiderfoot, and Multigo. Now, while performing the engagement is the fun part, and I've only touched on a few brief aspects of social engineering today, it's important to understand what you can do to safeguard your information. And that's best described through a map. But sadly, this one doesn't point to an X for buried treasure. Having a mitigation and prevention plan, or a map, is important in defending yourself from social engineering attacks. Having a map will allow you to build a more resilient workforce and organization, because you're stopping social engineers from even getting a simple foothold that allows them to use any one of the previous techniques we discovered to exploit. To develop a map, according to the professional social engineer Christopher Hadnagy, there are 4 key steps. The first one is to learn how to identify social engineering attacks. Understand what social engineering is, teach and train your employees on it. Understand what are some sort of attacks that we might see and what do they look like? What are some of the key characteristics to those? It's important that you know not everyone needs to know every single detail and be the Einstein of the digital world, but it is important to help your employees know what they are up against. The best way to inform your staff is to get them involved. If you're involved, invested, and interested in protecting yourself, you're going to go a lot harder in protecting yourself from a social engineer. This is typically best done through things like gamified learning, policies and procedures, but also awareness campaigns as well. As part of this first step, another thing we want to do is to help our employees understand the value that their information contains, that emails and phone numbers can be used and have been used to breach entire companies, and that just because someone's hands are full of KFC boxes and they've flashed you a pretty smile, it doesn't mean that they can bypass your organization's physical access and security. It's also important that you apply lessons from real-world incidents so that you and your peers don't have to be in that second or that shitty last position, and that you're in a far better off place than a number of organizations. The next thing we want to do is develop actionable and realistic policies. So first to do this, you've got to look at your policies, you've got to check if they're firstly in existence, but then A, actionable, and B, realistic. Policies are often looked upon kind of like the broccoli of cybersecurity controls. We all know it's good enough, it's good for us, but we don't really love it. And this is often because they're done in a restrictive way. If you jazz it up a little and give it new life, you could turn what was once a boiled piece of broccoli into a roasted, delicious component of a dish that wins MasterChef. But I digress. Really, when it comes to making actionable, realistic policies, you want to take the thinking out of them. Don't ever leave decisions up to the uneducated. America. Again, my talk represents the views and beliefs of only me and not my organization. You also want to remove the ability for emotion to motivate a bypass of the policy. And you want to provide insights into the why. So why is the policy trying to make, what is it trying to get us to enforce and apply? These are all key to help making your policy a consistent reaction for staff that then helps them react with muscle memory in a way which reinforces positive behaviors and mitigates social engineering attacks. The best example for this is a policy that says all IDs must be checked to prevent unauthorized people from bypassing authentication and access controls and then accessing company and customer information. That is a really strong, realistic, actionable policy. But stopping the sentence after all IDs must be checked does very little in helping instill any degree of emotion and desire that would be capable of preventing the biological reaction that I touched on before that kicks in when social engineers play on empathy. Now, what this does is it also takes out the thinking of the policy. If we look at that policy in full, it takes out the thinking, because the first part, the call to action, which was all IDs must be checked, wasn't answered. If the ID isn't checked, then the person can't go through. So for example, if we touch back on the girl with the KFC, even though she was really just trying to get back to her team with the goods, she couldn't produce an ID to check. And because of this, the guard couldn't simply just let her through without violating the policy himself. The third thing that we want to do is we want to perform real-world checkups. Now, what is that? A real-world checkup isn't just a check we do by sending out a phishing campaign. There is so much more to social engineering than just phishing campaigns. Performing real-world checkups means engaging someone to help perform exercises that can test the policies and procedures we've put in place to help our staff when they're targeted. This often involves hiring a third party to help run some tests, similar to the way that we would do tabletop exercises. Interestingly enough, don't limit yourself to or your tests to just phishing emails. Consider unplanned simulated physical intrusions and focus on exercises that involve asking questions and have clearly defined rules, requirements, and objectives that you can assess to get an understanding of your employees' awareness. And finally, the last key thing as part of our map is we want to implement applicable security awareness programs and campaigns. Now, you may be saying, hey, Georgia, that's the same as the last step there. But applicable security awareness campaigns and programs incorporate and involve new components while refining the ones that you've already got in place. In this stage, we're building on to the awareness programs that a company already has, and we're implementing and augmenting additional components and recommendations specific to your unique needs. Applicable awareness programs help employees learn not only what not to do, but what to do when something bad happens. For example, if you've developed a robust phishing awareness program, then it's quite unlikely you'll need to do much to augment this. People know the red flags, they know what looks suspicious in their inbox, and they're not too worried about it. However, this doesn't mean that your QR code phishing or your vishing defense is as developed, if it even exists. Instead of outsourcing security awareness, I encourage you to think back on the previous 3 steps and work on and build out a procedure for vishing or QR codes, which looks at the vishing or QR code vectors and then puts in place some additional policies and tests your staff in a safe environment. While not an overnight endeavor, once you've mapped the absolute hell out of your organization, you'll be in a far stronger position to thwart even the best of social engineers. No single step can be done in isolation, though, with the belief that alone it will protect you. Instead, all 4 steps need to be applied together and in strong symphony. But even once we've done this, it's not a set and forget activity. We still need to make sure that, just like our technical controls, we keep all these updated. We also need to make sure that we learn from our mistakes. Hopefully, it's the mistakes of the peers that we have around us, and so we can be more proactive about applying safeguards. And I can't hit this one home hard enough, but create an engaging, strong, positive security awareness culture that is filled with positive reinforcement and backed up by tangible, high-visibility executive support and dynamic and varied delivery methods for training. Think things like lunch and learns, simulations, or choose your own adventures, things that really immerse your employees in them. Now, with all this, it's really important to be patient. Good things take time, which is why I took 9 months. Now, making habits change is hard, but the effort is worth the result. In the end, the essence of social engineering really lies in its ability to exploit small, seemingly insignificant details, the things that we overlook or assume are harmless. OSINT transforms these details into powerful precision tools and weapons that allow attackers to craft narratives and take actions that bypass even the most sophisticated defenses. Whether it's a misplaced document, an unchecked pretext, or a moment of human kindness, these vulnerabilities can create unwelcome pathways into our organization and our personal and professional lives. The goal of today's discussion has not only been to shed light on some of the tactics that social engineers use, but also to underscore the importance of vigilance, training, and proactive measures to protect ourselves and our organizations. Remember, the key to defeating a malicious social engineer is to think critically before acting and to create a culture of security awareness. Finally, it's important to recognize that while the tactics and tools of social engineers are ever evolving, so too is our ability to defend against them. A robust mitigation and prevention plan, or MAP, it's not just a defense, it's an organizational mindset that transforms employees into the first line of security. By educating ourselves, implementing clear policies, and fostering a culture of skepticism where questions get encouraged, we can make it exponentially harder for social engineers to exploit our networks. Ultimately, the devil may be in the details, but so too is the strength to protect them. And with that strength, we can make sure that the front door, both literal and figurative, remains firmly closed to those who seek to deceive. Thank you.